So welcome to the think tank, folks. This is one of now quite a few sessions on Thursdays that are going to span right out into February, each time bringing three very thoughtful and energetic people together with us to share their latest thinking in the areas of change, transformational leadership, and other very tightly associated questions. How do human beings change in organizations that are trying to respond to a very, very fast changing context? So I'm going to ask our first person who's sharing in that to start us out, and that is Yabome Gilpin-Jackson. So welcome, Yabome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you for having me. I just want to start by expressing gratitude to the Nexus for Change crew, to Steve, Katie, to Lisa, Dave for hosting today, and to all of you for this phenomenal opportunity for such a time as this. There's no better time to be in provocation with each other. I have a colleague that says it's time to move, touch, and inspire each other at the level of our humanity. And I hope in some small way that my thoughts and the work that I'm currently up to might help do that in this space today. My name is Yabome Gilpin-Jackson, like home, for those of you who are wondering how to say it. I come to you via heritage in Sierra Leone, West Africa, and have lived the majority of my life here, where I'm joining you from, in an area we colonially call British Columbia, Canada, which is the traditional and unceded and continually occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and other Coast Salish nations. And I am specifically joining you today from a territory of the Kwantlen and Katzie nations. I think starting with that grounding is important for the thoughts that I am sitting with in this moment, because my work is very much anchored in my identity and therefore the perspectives that I bring to the issues of human organizing and certainly the I think sometimes quite contested issues of our time. So really the core question I want to start with today, and I will share just a few slides, really just for visuals, and in some places to help anchor for you sort of the flow of my few comments here. And of course, as Dave said, encouraging you to make all the notes that might be helpful to you as we continue the conversation. But my overview, my overarching question right now is, where do we go from here? And for me, this question sits squarely in the space of
October 7th, is that okay? I made a donation of $1,800 to
I'll just pause and wait till our audience member is muted. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That works?
So, we've got to get out. We've got to get a mute going here. Lisa.
All right.
Okay.
So where do we go from here? And this question is anchored for me in the fact that despite the continued and growing evidence of our, I would use the words dangerously unequal world, we're sitting in a nexus where we have everything from legislative debates to investor activism, to actions to roll back equity in the public square, in organizations and in institutions, and a continued context in which human and civil rights are contested. And therefore, in our organizational spaces, this terminology of diversity, equity, and inclusion and all its analogous acronyms feel like a nexus for a lot of polarities right now, and many of which are not unfamiliar to many of you in this space and our societies at large. And so in this space, organization development specifically continues to ask questions about what is our place and what is our work. And so I come into this conversation and this question of where do we go from here? First of all, with the grounding and the assumption that organization development has never been values neutral. We have held space for communities, for organizations, for whatever form of human organizing we're in, for all voices, including minoritized voices, however, those are defined by context, to be able to be voiced. But the field of itself, and when I say the field, I'm referring here generally to organization development, organizational development and change, or for those of you that work more broadly in human development, considering community and societal issues, all of the above. This is a field that has always centered humanistic and democratic values and collaborated to find solutions that provide the best possible outcomes for the humans in those systems that we serve. And that is my anchoring place. And therefore, everything I say is anchored in that. That means that we are in a field that has had to confront what social justice and inequities look like, and including which ones have persisted within our fields, whether that is everything from the legacy of early management sciences connection to enslavement theories and exploitation practices, to continually persistent issues like the current low representation of what our knowledge makers look like in how they're represented in our empirical sciences and literature, and what types of knowledge systems are privileged, even in issues like who represents our scholarship, and I'm including myself in that, and who represents our practitioners, and I'm representing myself in that, and then this persistent continued divide between the bodies of knowledge that are created with those communities as just two groups, and there are many more that intersect with what I call the knowledges, plural, intentional, that inform our work. So I believe that organization development scholars and practitioners and community members and organizers and et cetera, have to now hold the tension between the past, the present, and the future, and determine how we cross this threshold of the overlapping divides that we're facing yet again in a way that helps our collective humanity move forward. And that is my overarching thinking right now, and the place I come from when I say, where do we go from here? So I've done I'm going to bring forward 3 bodies of work that represent my thinking across this spectrum, starting a little bit with work that I've been doing, thinking about a bit of the past orientation in terms of having a clear-eyed both critical inquiry, and again, this is one of the words that is no longer loved in the popular zeitgeist, all critical perspectives, whether that's critical race theory or others. But yes, we again, as a field, have always engaged in both critical inquiry and appreciative inquiry broadly, meaning both looking at hey, what are the assumptions, beliefs, et cetera, that are not serving us, and what is working that we can amplify, right? And so from that lens, I was part of this online anthology. You will get the link later, called Social Justice in Organizational Change. And I had the privilege of working quite intensively over a year, maybe 2 years, I've lost count right now, with a co-author on this particular chapter within the anthology, Toward the Transformation of Organization Development and Change with Possibility and Courage. And what we did was think about, well, I have done work on something I called gray zone change. This idea that we seem to be in this era of complexity at the edge of chaos. Feels like anything drops us over the cliff. For those of you that have worked with the kind of a model that drops us into the cliff, and I say the cliff into chaos, and therefore, as we know from the work on transition, if we're in a space where something is trying to end, you then enter this messy middle before we get to the new beginning. And I say right now that we are trying to navigate through this entire gray zone and spending a lot of time in the messy middle. We're not there yet. We're not at the equity-centered futures that I believe many of us are working for and hoping for. And in this messy middle, we have to do that transition work. We have to do a lot of learning and synthesis and help people learn, unlearn, relearn. We have to do the work of group and systems development. We are a systems field, and I think one of the things that ails us right now is a continued oscillation back to individualized perspectives rather than seeing the system, as well as the tendency then to work on single interventions that don't find their place in terms of the systemic change work. And therefore, for example, we as a community have done a lot of consciousness raising and bias training that then has no place for participants to then anchor this raised consciousness, which then leads to some of the apathy and retractions that we're seeing. These are all things we know well. So how do we not only learn and synthesize knowledge, but support group and system movement? And how do we do this with courage and possibility? For edge workers, for humans, for individuals, many of us, I'm not assuming any intersectionalities and positionalities in this space, but many of us for whom this has not been work in many ways by choice. For me, it's been choice by agency, but it's not been choice because I have moved through the world as a Black African woman who has experienced living on the African continent, was born in Europe and has lived the majority of my life in what we call North America, and has lived the differences in my life experience as I move through spaces, and have experienced what inequities look like across all of those spaces, whether xenophobia and tribalism or racism, or gendered exclusions, et cetera, et cetera. And so in many ways, this work has been thrust on me, whether I wanted it or not, and I have chosen to engage. And so what is the possibility and courage then required of what Black feminist scholars have called edge walkers, that I then now extend to everyone that is choosing to continue to engage in spite of your intersectionality and positionality of the world. And so in this work, we asked, who is researching and writing in the ODC field? Who is included and excluded from scholarship in the ODC field, and why? Which people groups hold power over other people groups? What is our intent for questioning and seeking transformation of the current state? How might we ensure holistic integration and transformation of change theories and models through our ideology critique and a move towards meaningful inclusion over inclusion that is tokenistic and assimilation tactics? And then what? So what, now what? How do we invite decision makers to the table that are representative for transformational change? Everything from climate to systems that need to be better for humans and so forth. What lenses and voices that call us to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive in the two bigger buckets, forget all the acronyms that we've been throwing around, are intentionally sought and integrated? What structures are we putting in place to remove and mitigate dominant structural biases? And what organizational change approaches serve the current situation? And I think most importantly for me in that realm of possibility of courage, how do we support the edge workers who at any one time, from this other piece of work that I was part of with social sciences confronting global crisis, which started with a provocation by Ed Shine that has now left us on this side, and was co-edited by Jean Bertonick. I had a chapter in it, as you can, that was called Gathering on the Bridge, Co-Creating Our Emerging Equity-Centered Future. And again, brought forward some of these ideas. I'll leave them, you'll get this later. But for the edge workers that at any one time are engaging breaking strategies, how do we dismantle what's not working? Bridging strategies, how do we bridge from here to there, bring the best of the past into the emerging future and make it work while being in systems that don't necessarily serve all of us? Or how do we build parallel systems? All of this is more feels often like impossible work. How do we support those edge workers doing that work as a community? And so quickly, I think I have less than 5 minutes, Dave. I'm not tracking, but
a little less than 5.
Okay, perfect. And so that's thinking and work I've been doing in terms of the past and anchoring to where we really are and the questions we ought to be asking. And then in the middle, in terms of the present, I've had the pleasure of being co-editor for an organization development review special issue that will be out this month. So watch for it this month of January. So watch for it if you're part of the ODNetwork community. And if not, ask your friends that are. Many of us here are. And we've had articles now selected that are in press that range from, Fred Miller and Judith Katz, scholar practitioners in this space, to Ph.D. students. I think I saw you, Sarah Keith, in the audience. Welcome. Thank you for your work. Here's the listing. You'll see it where it's live. But what I loved about this work is the calls to action in every single one of these articles. From the call that we should change our approaches, but not our goals, to the call to integrate what we think of as OD scholarship and practice with work that comes from diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging community practitioners and organizers. That tells us a lot about human ecosystems and how to do this work in a way that honors and brings all voices along. To the call on centering equity groups, experiences, so that, forget the acronyms we've been talking about, what about refusal, rest, and joy? I loved that article. Written, including an intersectional group of authors, including Canadian Indigenous colleagues. What does refusal, rest, and joy look like? And how do we explore models like the Belonging, Dignity, Justice, and Joy model by Miriam Davis's work? How do we spot like our chronic blockers, hyper-individualism, binary thinking, intellectualizing, and return to identity and wholeness perspectives that come from pausing to access inner knowing and collective wisdom? What does dialogic inclusive leadership look like? How do we in OD return to Lewinian science, social science, that gave us a theoretical grounding that is often left behind in this conversation, and use that to move this work forward in OD? How can nonprofits access maturity models, and a specifically OD maturity model added to like the multicultural organization development spectrum that the NTL colleagues had developed a long time ago, to create one for the nonprofit sector? And what are the consequences of misalignment between organizations thinking and philosophies around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of those related acronyms, and the actual practitioners and leaders do the work? And how do we bridge that misalignment and allow for ambidexterity in the work? And finally, this is where I will close, is an article that I have in press, or in the process, I shouldn't say completely in press, but in final stages of review and edits, where I am proposing, I think, ideas that are critical for both OD practitioners and leaders of all kinds in this age. So I end with this anecdote of a day in my life as wearing my leadership hat, leaving a senior leadership role, and my mother calls and she says, "How was your day?" routinely. And I evil laugh back. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, "Mom, what a day." This was a day in which throughout the day, I met with staff colleagues. I met with colleagues from the academy. I met with employee group colleagues. I met with a staff advocacy group. I had a board committee meeting. I met with the full board. And I met with a community interest group that we serve. Throughout the day, this was my entire day. And at the end of the day, as I wrote down my notes from that exercise and from listening, because at some point, all I did was deep listening and engage these OD skills, I realized that there was zero interest convergence on my page. Every single group had systematically canceled out the interests of the previous group. I had the group that wanted us to amplify more equity guardrails. I had the group that wanted us to cancel DEI work because they were finding it too polarizing. I had the group that wanted us to invest more in their interests, and the group saying you're wasting time investing out there and our needs are not being met. And the leadership and board that were saying there's not enough resources to go around. We need to make hard choices. And so for me, this goes beyond our frames that we've been using. We've been using frames like polarity thinking, which is great, with thinking about how do we hold both and across binaries and polarities. But we are in an age of compound overlapping differences, no longer binaries. And so in this age, I propose that we engage dialectical thinking, use that dialogic mindset to hear, to listen, but lean hard into holding emergence. We know this, but I think we know it, but I'm not sure we always do it well. So lean into the block leader as convener and listen, listen, listen. Surface those differences. Don't run from them. Surface them and let all of that converge. We know thesis and thesis and synthesis. Let us let all of that go into the pot, and let us let collective wisdom come out, whatever that looks like sometimes, but just keep moving things forward and leave space to listen. So leaning in with compassion to help find those collaborative solutions is where I'm sitting right now, because where else do we go? Where do we go from here?
Wow.
And there.
Thank you, Yabome. That was and will be something that's going to hopefully keep us up at night thinking. Now, Rosa, would you join now? And you said you'd like to hear a little bit of Yabome before you cast your voice. So why don't we pick it up from what you've heard and where you want to take us in your thinking?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. And thank you so much, Yabome. That
Incredible.
was truly magnificent. So much that I'm resonating with. I'll start at the end. Listener as convener, surfacing difference, allowing convergences to emerge. And before that, I was really moved with what you were talking about, the need for both critical and appreciative inquiry. And also, your inclusive stance towards knowledges and the invitation for many knowledges to be present. And then your brilliant start with that OD has never been values neutral. This is a humanistic practice. So those are just a few highlights, but I hope that it's okay to share those. Yeah, so I am there's a question that I'm sitting with, and I'm not sure I want to start with it. I think I want to work up to it. And I think I want to work up to it by telling a little bit of a story. So I came to organization development in the year 2000 after having attended a facilitation workshop that included an unusual mix of activists and business people. And my first identity is as an activist. So my name is Rosa Zubizarreta-Ada. I was born in Peru. My dad's Peruvian, my mom's Cuban. We moved to this country when I was young, and I grew up here in the States. Sometimes people say, "Oh, but you speak English so well." And I'm like, "Oh, that's what happens when little kids learn a second language when they're very young." But yes, Spanish is my mother tongue. Mucho agradecimiento a todos los que están aquí. I just said thank you to everyone who's here. And yes, and thank you to the organizers, and thank you to Steve. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to our facilitators and hosts, Lisa and Steve, Katie, and Dave. So I was at this workshop that kind of blew my mind. It was shortly after the anti-WTO protests in Seattle. And, there was a lot of activists protesting NAFTA at that point. And I kind of have to say, we were right. A lot of factories left the country and a lot of economic hardship followed, and we're still paying the price. But anyway, here was this workshop where there was like activists and business people, and the kind of curiosity and mutual curiosity and openness that was present in that room was pretty memorable for me. And that's what inspired me to go back to school. And I ended up studying organization development at master's at Sonoma State University with Saul Eisen, who completed his degree at Weatherhead School of Management in Cleveland. And so after I completed my master's in 2002, some years after that, I began, and I was mostly doing work with small family-owned businesses or small to medium-sized nonprofits or community groups. I've never done corporate, although I admire the experience of those who have. So I started to hear about some practitioners in Austria from the community of practice of this co-creative way of working with extreme differences in perspective and allowing creativity and synergy to arise. I was hearing that some of the practitioners of this dynamic facilitation approach were working in Austria in the context of deliberative democracy, which means that they were working with sortition-based mini-publics. Some of you may have started hearing about citizens' assemblies these days, which are people who are chosen at scientific random and stratified, and the intention is to reflect the diversity of the larger whole. And to then work together to discover or create some common ground within a given public policy area, come up with a set of shared recommendations, which are then given to the public officials who sponsor the process and who have committed to implementing the recommendations that this mini public comes up with to whatever degree is feasible. So eventually, this led me back to school, to Fielding Graduate University, for a doctoral program in human and organizational systems. And I began there to work on a dissertation on these Bürgerräte. So I do want to mention that the DF-based Bürgerräte are based on the work of American business consultant Jim Roth, who developed both DF and a model called the Wisdom Council. The public administrators in Austria who learned DF from Jim had previous experience with a number of public participation, including citizens' juries and planning cells, and they brought all their previous experience forward when they adapted Jim's model and renamed it Bürgerräte, which means a citizens' council or a civic council in English. And they have since continued to experiment with this model and further evolve it. And for my dissertation, I did a lot of qualitative interviews with the facilitators of these processes because I wanted to learn what were they learning as they did this work and what was their experience as they did this work. But after completing the dissertation in 2023, so just a year ago, almost a year and a half by now, is at the beginning of 2023, I continued synthesizing in my head all of the readings I'd done in this field of deliberative democracy. And what has become most significant to me at this point is a kind of a meta level finding. There's about 20 years of experiments with different forms of mini publics, different formats, different lengths, different facilitation modalities. Yet it has really sunk in to me that it's an amazing finding that across nearly all of these experiments, ordinary people, when invited to participate in a supportive, i.e. facilitated context, repeatedly report that afterwards that they found it to be a very meaningful and worthwhile experience to grapple with what the political sciences just called collective action problems, right? It's like this is not something that anybody can solve on their own, but we all need to come up with a policy or a way of addressing a particular issue for us to be able to benefit. And these groups are very often able to find shared ways forward. And so to me, why this feels so big is it just feels like collectively, as a field, we have the knowledge of how to bring out the best in people. And thanks to the work of this neighboring field, I'm definitely a bridging person in terms of attempting to bridge different fields and different cultures and all that. But in this neighboring field of deliberative democracy, there have been all of these instances that show that what we know can work in organizations, bringing together different people who reflect different parts of the system in dialogue, true dialogue with one another, that can work on a societal level as well, right? So anyway, to me, it just feels really big. Yeah. And so I guess that's my question. If we were to really take in that we know how to bring out the best in people, where would we go from there, right? Because we have this, I don't want to call it a myth because there's a level of reality to it, right? We know that when human beings when we have our fears amplified and stoked, when there's that phrase that's being used in the media a lot, kind of like politicians throwing red meat to their base. When we get triggered, a whole certain part of us comes out, right? The defensive, protective, aggressive. And there's so much science on this these days, right? There's all the polyvagal theory about how we can have our fight, flight, freeze come out. But we also know that when we are in psychologically safe environments, and I do understand about safe and brave spaces, but when we are in a space that we know that whoever is, quote unquote, in charge of the space is not going to be attacking us, is not going to be scapegoating us, is not going to be excluding us. Because the thing is, we also know that biologically speaking, one of our worst fears is getting kicked out of the group. Because when we were hunter-gatherers, if we got kicked out of the tribe, we'd starve. Like we needed one another to live, right? People are not isolated human beings. So that persists, and that there's really high degrees of, that we tend to take for granted of social anxiety. Like there's some experiments that were done where people were wired up to those biofeedback machines, and you're in a room and the boss raises their eyebrow after you speak. And, you can see it in the sensors. You're starting to say, oh no, did I upset them? Him or her, or they, am I going to get in trouble afterward, right? Um, uh, uh, that kind of thing, right? So I think social anxiety is much more common than we tend to recognize. I think it's a spectrum, but we all have some degree of it. But when we're in an environment where the role of the facilitator is to create space where each person is going to be heard and each person is going to be treated with dignity and respect, magic happens, right? As we know in our field. And what these countless experiments in the deliberative to democracy field have shown is that this also works in a public context. There's other really interesting research that I'm fascinated by, and how's my time?
In about 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm really fascinated by the research that was done to test the effects of deep canvassing, right? There are some social psychologists who went out and found that these conversations where people were exchanging narratives in non-judgmental spaces are incredibly powerful at catalyzing shifts in human beings. Now, they warn in their research, they say, it's not all that we need, because we need to have, for instance, laws and codes against hate speech and bullying and all that kind of stuff. But the social science shows that those laws change people's behaviors, but they don't change people's attitudes the way that being in small non-judgmental groups can do. Because if you're in a small non-judgmental group where you're being heard, but the only expectation is that others are going to be heard too, there's again a level of de-escalation that happens, that people are actually able to learn, right? And people are actually able to take in information, because that's one of the things when we're in our social engagement system, we're able to take in complex information, and we're able to hear from people who we might not initially relate to or identify with, and we're able to make connections with all of that. So I'm pretty excited about this values base and this knowledge base and this experience base that we have. And then the question is, how and where and in what context do we find to put all that to good use? But we know how to bring out the best in people in groups, and groups are the context where people can learn the most powerfully, right? Because that's how we learned all of our negative conditioning in the first place, right? Being part of dysfunctional groups and being part of a group where each person is being treated with dignity and respect can be an incredibly transformative, powerful experience. And, we all have skills in this. So my hope is that this will stimulate people to think a little bit about where else can your skill set be applied beyond just organizations.
Yeah. Wow. Another powerful moment that you've given us, Rosa. Thank you. And I am beginning in my own mind to see some connections between what Yabome has instigated in our thinking and what you're bringing about. I particularly like the conclusion that our work is to bring the best out in people, including ourselves. Now, Bob Stilger, tell us where your thinking is at this moment, given these 15 minutes that you've just lived through with us. And tell us a little bit about yourself in the
my
process.
thinking is sort of bouncing around the
Bring us
universe,
home, Bob.
I have Siri talking to me. It's always helpful when Siri starts to speak. Let me see if I can get rid of her and continue. So I'm Bob Stilger. I'm coming to you this morning from the lands of the Spokane tribe in central North America in the Columbia River bioregion. And I'm just back from 6 weeks in Japan.
Wow.
In this life, I'm of Cherokee descent. In previous lives, I'm of Japan descent. And just listening to Yabone and Rosa brings up so many different things for me. You know, I want to change what you said, Rosa, just a little bit, from bringing out the best in people to how can people bring out their own best in a dangerously unequal world. And going back to Yabone, knowing that it starts with listening and refusal and rest and joy, and that it's collective. We have to do this together. Several years ago now, for many years, I've used a model called the two loops that looks at the what's falling apart and what's coming together. And I was about to use it with a group that I've worked with in Alberta. And I realized that it just didn't feel useful enough in that time. And I started playing with a new model that I've called the two hands of chaos. One hand is that which is disappearing, that which is dissolving, that which is going away. The other hand is that which is regenerating and emerging. And we live between those two hands. We live in that chaos. We live in that messy middle. And as far as I can tell, we're going to be in that messy middle for the rest of our lives, the rest of our children's lives, for the rest of their children's lives. This is it, folks. This is where we are. And what the hell do we do? A lot of my work over the last almost 15 years has been deeply informed by the community-based work that I was doing in Japan after the triple disasters of earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear explosions on March 11th, 2011. The world as we knew it ended that day for so many people. And it particularly ended that day for the people in Fukushima. You know, in the other parts of the disaster area in Japan, people were, in most places, not all, but in most places, they were able to go back to what they'd known before. Not so in Fukushima. The past was completely gone. There was no returning. There was only moving forward. And the question, of course, of how the hell do we do that? I was locked out of Japan during COVID and went back after 2 years in 2022. My spouse and I have been part of a team that have hosted a learning journey to Fukushima from people, primarily people in Japan, who've had a yearning to connect, a yearning to learn, and not been able to do that. What I noticed immediately in 2022 was a shift in orientation. You know, for the first years, there was a gambarimasu. We're going to get this done. We're going to work hard. We're going to change everything. By 2022, what I heard from so many different people in so many places was, you know, we're just living our lives with as much joy as we can. Back to that refusal, rest and joy. And the refusal is of working ourselves to death, trying to do something that we don't understand and that we can't see. And that actually what we need to do is center in joy. Last month, I get to Japan and I go to a small retreat at a place called Small Earth. Small Earth is this amazing, you know, there's no words for it in English or in Japanese. It's this amazing endeavor that started 25 years ago when a young man came to a small village in Chiba Prefecture outside of Tokyo. saw the neglected rice fields that were first created 1,300 years ago and said, "This is my place." I was invited to be part of a gathering of folks who were connected to something called the co-creation movement. And the co-creation movement was something I helped to start in Japan 10 years ago. And it was just this amazing group of people, people who were, first of all, understood that we can't do co-creation without the earth. We can't do co-creation without spirit. We can't do co-creation without each other. And we came together for an amazing 2 days. One of the first things that happened was a 2-hour meditation on the mountain above the rice fields. This amazing musician from Japan came back, had this deepest of check-ins that I think I've ever experienced, because we were all very much in that deep spiritual field. And one of the things we started talking about was that, this is great, we love it. And this kind of a field is inaccessible to so many people. What do we do with that? How do we work with that? That question, and by the way, the question that animates me these days, and has for at least 25 years, is what makes enough of a difference to make a difference? It's kind of a complicated way of saying, what the fuck? We are really in deep shit, and fundamental changes are needed. Many of us feel that. Many of us who come at that question very differently feel that. But fundamentally, we've got to start making the changes that make enough of a difference to make a difference. And we have to do that. I'll go back to your word, Rosa, magic. We need magic to do that. And we need the courage, the confidence, the companionship, and the will to stay alive in that messy middle. A couple days after that small earth retreat, I was in Akashi, which is not far from where Ken Nishikawa hangs his hat most of the time. I've been working in Akashi for the last 10 years, every year conducting a future session that creates a space for people to come together to be with each other and to sink their hearts into these questions. This time in Akashi, there was a meeting with the person who's the lead of the co-cre movement and the mayor of Akashi. The mayor of Akashi, who I met 10 years ago at my first future session in Akashi. She brought 10 junior high students, elementary students, excuse me. And it ended up being this incredible space of the kind that Rosa was speaking to. One of the themes that came out of that session was the young people saying, the adults actually listened. They listened to us. And the adults saying, those kids, they had such important questions and they had such important things to say. It was a space of true dialogue with people that thought they never had anything to talk with each other about. Maru-chan, who became my friend, said that her life was changed in that first dialogue. It was changed by what she saw from those students and those adults by being in a dialogical space. She ended up deciding to get a Ph.D. in social innovation. Several years later, she ran for the city council. And year before last, she was elected mayor. The first thing that she did as mayor was create the Office of Citizen Co-Creation and hired facilitators and graphic artists and illuminators to come in and help with that. And I've been supporting her in imagining what that office might be, and brought Ai-chan in to work with us that day, and two true sisters found each other. And one of the things I was reflecting on was that if we took the 10 or so staff that were in that room and plopped them in small earth the week before, they would have all gone like totally crazy. I know, what is this? Huh? You want us to climb the mountain and spend 2 hours meditating? Don't you realize we're important people with a lot of stuff to do? It's another perfect example of the question of what makes enough of a difference to make a difference, and how do we wrap our hands and hearts around it? I'll come back to I don't want to call it an answer, I'll call it a proposition that we're working with at New Stories right now. And it's something that we're calling principles-guided co-creation. New Stories, by the way, is a nonprofit that Robert Theobald and I established on the day of his death at the end of 1999, because what we'd been saying for 2 years as we'd worked with Y2K was that it's time for a new story. The story that we've been living in doesn't work anymore, and we need a new story to give us inspiration and guidance for the future. Principle-guided co-creation. It's a synthesis of principle-focused developmental evaluation and our long-time work at New Stories on the spiral of co-creation. Part of what we're saying now is, in terms of that space, this bridge between the deep, connected, fully trusted, bringing out the best in people in a dangerously unequal world. The space of doing that. I lost my train of thought. This is the problem with jet lag. I just got back. The work of doing that is best guided by the principles that we hold dear. We understand principles to be our values in action. Most of the time, in the helter-skelter busyness of our world, we forget both our values and our principles. Our sense in terms of co-creation, and we think co-creation is the only thing that makes any sense now. We have to come together in our own context with people that we agree to trust, that we agree to listen to, that we find ourselves falling in love with. We have to come together in our own context to create the world that we want now. We believe that creation of the world that we want now can best be guided by first learning how to collectively articulate those values that we hold dear and turning those into principles that can guide our action. Yesterday, I got inspired to put together a little slide deck, which probably, fortunately, would not work. But I want to show just one thing from that slide deck. And Lisa, can I share? Am I all okay?
Yep, you're set up to share.
All righty.
There it is.
There it is, right in front of you.
Oh, my Lord.
So this is from some work that we're doing in the state of Missouri on food justice right now. And we worked with an organization there that we're in partnership with. First, about a year ago, to understand the principles that were important to them as they began to engage in this food justice initiative. And I want to take just a moment to look at these. The first set is around being in relationship as humans. First principle, be fully human, be yourself, be curious. Be in true and authentic relationships with others starts with the risk of coming into deeper relationship with yourself. Learning about and caring for others and caring for yourself can be a tender balance. connect and share. We're all in this together, just as human beings who want food justice in Missouri. Let's pause and see each other, reaching out a hand across our differences to see what might be possible. We have to explore new patterns of relationship. Creating food justice in Missouri will take a long time. We must stand together for the long haul as we address both immediate needs and create conditions for deep systems change. And they go on. Another tier that's talking about how the hell do we get out of the way? That we've got to earn trust. We've got to center community expertise. We've got to reflect together. And we've got to create transformative change. And we do that by engaging equity as a process, noticing power and shifting it, tending all parts of the system and making everything visible at all levels.
Bob, that's our last minute for your presentation.
Okay, well,
and
then
it's really a great way to sum up a fascinating 15 minutes. Folks,
all right.
We're now coming back to the gallery, and timing is working out great. I'm delighted with what I've been learning, and I think you may be too. So let's share that delight. But to me, there's one word that keeps coming up through all three, and that is the word work. Working in our own context to bring about and co-create change. Work, work, work. That's what brings us here each Thursday, and it's what we need to do the moment after we turn this session off and step back into our day. It's a very special kind of work, and it's not necessarily by title or other sanctions. It seems to me that it's an individual choice, just as Yabome said when she said, I didn't necessarily choose the work chose me. So let's go into our breakouts for about 10 minutes and chew up what we've heard, and and there will be some moments for dialogue with our speakers after the breakouts. So come on back in 10. And we will stay together, the panel. There it goes. This is always an interesting moment in Zoom conferences, isn't it? With whom am I going to be thrown? And in 10 minutes, how can I change my life and theirs? There we go. I'm not going to touch this, Lisa. I might hit the wrong button. So I'm going to just wait until it's all sorted. I've got that in front of me. All right. Wow. Talk among yourselves. What did we create here in the last hour?
And Lisa, just one logistic. I'm not sure if Ken wasn't able to go to breakout or not, or wanting to stay deliberately.
He might have stepped away, so I've spotlighted you guys so we.
Oh, there's Ken.
Just chat.
Yeah. Ken's welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm struck by the resonances and the very different language that we use for delving into this mess.
Yeah.
I love that you're working with the term co-creation, Bob.
Yeah.
I have somehow found myself in Potsdam, Germany, working for the Research Institute for Sustainability in Potsdam. And I'm part of the Advancing Transdisciplinarity and Co-Creation Research Group. So I'd love to share with folks some of the work that you're doing.
Love, yeah, and what you're up to.
I mean, plus one on that, I heard a lot of co-creating, convening. I'd like to learn more, Bob, in terms of the two hands of chaos. I loved that articulation. And for me, saw a similarity to what I've been trying to articulate with gray zone change. And working through that process. So would love to learn more about that work. Yeah, but and I think I'm reflecting on both of you articulated this, and for me, it's what's at the back end of that in my experience. So the fact that we know we have the skill sets, the understanding, the research, the praxis in terms of why it works to bring people together and create, trusted convening. Well, Bob, almost to the end of yours, you said, bring people together who we trust and who agree to trust us. And that's why I lose sleep, because I've been in these communities lately where there's so much hardening of positions that I've often been thinking, in ODC, human development, we assume we can get people there, but when things are so escalated, how do we first lean into de-escalation and conflict resolution? And what I actually have found, and in that last piece I talked about a bit, is none of these skills, in fact, in those contexts, these skills are like immediately shut down. Like, we are not here to co-create when we are in pain. We are not here to co-create when we have not healed. Like, I can't tell you how many times some version of that. And so what does it look like to just even sit with the escalation until people are ready to de-escalate, or sit with the escalation and let people know it's okay to express the outrage, or sit with it, and when nothing else works, okay, let's go due process, whatever that is. Even the ones I don't love, everything from the continuum of, legal to mediation, and like, where's the trusted third party that's not us and them, that can then just help due process to create some de-escalation, enough that maybe we can engage in these other things. But I think, Bob, like you, for me, for over decades now, I was in healthcare here. We have public healthcare, which I know Americans love to think is better than theirs, but there's so much conflict in our public healthcare system. And I worked in that system in leader and OD roles for 10 years. And so many rooms where we could get nowhere. Nowhere, because convening in the way that we know gets people there once their brains can get there, they're just not ready.
So you had a thought on that, I think.
I should share with you the story of Kingston sometime. Kingston, Ontario, and the hospital system there that I had the privilege of doing some work with a few years ago. To add to the complication you're describing, Yabome, it's also like I'm thinking of this food justice work in Missouri, where the sponsoring organization is fully committed to transformative change. The team that's working on it is fully committed to transformative change, and they're embedded in an organizational structure that is stuck, totally stuck, unable to do what it says. And the pull between that wanting to be in a trusting, deep, generative space and doing that within a system that's completely stuck is like, it's totally confounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to say is, Yabome, I love the distinction about convening and hosting, right? Because it's like convening is how do you get the people there, and then what do you do once you have them there is a different thing, and often much less challenging. I not in the realm of answers, just in the realm of interesting things people are trying. in the deliberative democracy world, they're pretty positivistic. So they're pretty big on wanting to have representation by having the people who were originally chosen randomly to show up, because otherwise what you get is the people with more time and the people with, all that. So there's a thing that some groups have been doing. There's a group in Germany, but I think it started actually in Ireland, where they actually go to the homes of the people who were chosen at random. And it's very respectful. It's not badgering. It's just like, we're really curious. We believe you received an invitation and we just want to learn more about what was in your way of responding, right? So it's like really going the extra mile to make people feel welcome, to help people feel welcome, and to thereby get more diversity into these assemblies, which is not easy. It's, because you're working against the whole inequality of the larger system, right? Some people have more time, some people have less time. And even when you have it in your budget that you're going to give people some funds in order to go, and sometimes people go because of the funds, and then they end up being there and really finding meaning in the process. So it's very interesting, all of the nuances of what happens with that.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, that's that. I'm noodling that because I heard it again, and I'm like, I'm worried about and you all, I know you understand this, but about that shadow bias in our work, that because we know what works once, you can convene people, we assume you can convene people, and that's a starting place. But I think it makes us not effective when we're in these highly escalated, which is a lot of our context right now.
It's where
Highly
Bob has
charged.
shown us
That's right. It's like,
where we're
what do
going to
you
be.
do in the very politicized environments, the very conflict-ridden, interest-ridden environment, which in the polarizations of today is a lot of spaces.
Yeah.
And what people are finding is that when it's a local issue, that tends to draw people, because it's not
that tends to, yeah.
Right? It's a local issue, then people come.
Yeah, like the asset-based community organizing work as well. Deep democracy. Yeah, I know what you're saying, Rosie.
I just got taken off the screen, so I'm not sure what happened. Am I still there, Lisa?
Here you are.
Wow. I disappeared for an instant and it scared me because, I'm over 80, and anytime you suddenly disappear is not a good sign. Folks, welcome back. The four of us had a really great discussion that followed on what each heard each other say. And now we'd like to hear a bit about what you heard from the floor. But my request is that you use the reaction button, which is down there, and it's called React. And just raise your hand and I'll try my best to follow that in the right sequence. So anyone like to kick off their experience in the breakout or before as well?
So my reaction button has my hand up.
Oh yeah, I didn't. Yeah, it's very faint, Francis. We got to get you a fancier button.
I'm not really ready to just react in terms of the rich discussion I just had with two people. But I will say this about this concept, and I appreciate it very much. The first thing I said in my small group, I'm so amazed at the expectation that I can listen to one profound speaker and immediately shift to another and then to another, integrate it and talk with three people. You guys have great expectations of what I'm capable of. I just want to put that out there. I just want to put that out. So I will take advantage of this time to say, what I liked about all of the speakers, without just being individual, is it's reinforcing what I'm seeing, this level for us to move to a deeper, higher level of humanizing the human work that we do, especially in view of the chaos that we're in, but also in view of where the technology is going to take us, whether we want to or not. I think it's going to require us to be really the things we talk about being. So thank you. This is great.
Anyone else? Thank you, Francis. Ryan, I think I see your hand. I got to put my glasses on or I will miss other people's hands here. Go ahead,
you
Ryan.
you witnessed me correctly, Dave. I was in a fantastic conversation with Ken, Lynn, and Jillian, and we started with the acknowledgement of knowledges and the wonder of that particular inquiry, and that what are these knowledges, and saying, oh, and bringing awareness to knowledges, and also the idea of that knowledge is bringing a collective, so coming to a collective, and how that is inviting collectivism, and that seems like a good thing, is that us coming together. And then we also realized that with the collectivism, it's important to acknowledge the individual and the independence. So there's this balance between how each of us in our travels through education and the world have become individualized, and that's the water that many of us do swim in, and what is in the way of becoming this collective and acknowledging knowledge. And then we ended up in this wonderful place of that one of these knowledges is, from the African traditions, of the word Ubuntu, right? So we talked about Ubuntu a little bit in there, and what is how are all of these wonderful, delicious flavors in the soup? How do those of us from different flavors become a we, and getting to agreement about what the collective is, and how the balance of the individual with that is challenging the creation of this we. And wow, it was just a wonderful discussion. I echo Francis's frustration and joy at the challenge to be with all these speakers at the same time.
Yeah.
And thank you to all of you, and thank you to
Hey,
Lynn,
Ryan.
Jillian, and Ken.
Thank you. David Bright, you had your hand up. There you
Yeah. I was really drawn into the discussion about at least some of the references to the values of the field of organization development. Coincidentally, I'm writing a book chapter right now where I'm exploring that very issue. Like, what is the essence of the field? And kind of coming back to a question that's been examined many, 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 many times. But my my feeling on that question is that really it is around the values of the field, but it's not just the values. Like, defining the field by the values is insufficient. There's an implicit theory or a set of theories about what ideal organizations or ideal human systems look like and feel like that we need to make more explicit, I think. And in my view, I think that if we can do that as a field, it's like, what are the ultimate aims of the field? My answer to that question would be, as OD practitioners, scholar practitioners, our goal is to create and explore the meaning of and practice of healthy, vibrant, flourishing human systems. That to me seems to be the implicit goal of OD as a field and of professional practice. And so I guess my view is that if we can make that even more explicit, that it clarifies the theory that fits, the practices that fit, the different, it allows for multiplicity and plurality in the way that we explore the questions and the practices that help us as humanity to work toward that objective. And so I guess my question, having made that bold statement, to what degree does that view of our field resonate with you? And what in what you've shared could add to that perspective or challenge that perspective?
Let's put that to any of the three panelists, that question. Any volunteer panelists intrigued by what David has shared? Bob, I'm going to ask you, what do you think?
I am the least OD of the three panelists.
Maybe that's
so
why
I'm going to pass. Oh, that's cheating.
Well, you're not dug in like some of us are. And I mean intellectually, dug in. But given the world that you've shown us,
Yeah.
and the frustration, that's much of what we know is not likely to be effective in bringing people together and bringing the best out of them. What should our field do except listen more to folks like you?
I think it goes back to what both Rosa and Yabome highlighted, and that is learning how to come into deeper relationships over time and to recognize that this is long-term work, that nothing that we do in the short term makes any difference except feeds into long-term possibilities. I think the challenge that I've seen with much OD work that I've encountered is that it continually looks for quick fixes because that's the only thing that it's able to wrap its hands around and its head around. And the challenge is that, as much as we talk about transformation and organizational change, most of our systems don't want that and will resist it with every muscle that they have. How do we recognize that our dominant culture does not support transformative change? How do we instead, I'll use Meg Wheatley's language of how do we nurture and create islands of wholeness?
That's right.
It's those islands of wholeness where we begin to grow the new. And one of the things that's really interesting and key is when we begin to create partnerships between those islands of wholeness, or she calls them islands of sanity. We call them islands of wholeness. How do we create deep partnerships between those islands of sanity and those who have the resources and the knowledge that is sequestered and stagnated at the center of the system?
Yabome, you had your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to trouble the group, sorry, with the question that we that I raised in our dialogue with the three of us panelists as well, which I continually sit, partly because of some of the spaces that I've worked in and through that I had a lot of conflict, a lot of historical and current trauma. Those of you from fielding that know my work, I research post-traumatic growth as well. But these are communities that are hurting now, and or communities that are, even before this moment, is sitting with a lot of polarization and just different views of the world and solutions. And I worry that as a field, in spite of my starting point that, well, to be clear, I started with, we've never been values neutral. We're humanistic and democratic. And that includes hearing minoritized voices regardless of context. And that's represented in the context. And sometimes that includes hearing the difficult, unpopular views, et cetera, et cetera. I worry that as a field that we lean so hard into the positive orientation we have on the values of the field, etc., that we run away from the difficult spaces. We label it neatly with whatever labels, systems labels. Oh, they're just, highly complex, too much conflict, blah, blah, blah. We label them all the good systems language we have, but we don't actually do the work with them. Yeah. And what does it look like when I said I've been in spaces where people are like, we don't need your appreciative inquiry. We're hurting right now. We're not ready for your community dialogue. We're just pissed. We're not ready for da-da-da. What do you do with those escalated conflicts? We know what to do. I think we just don't like doing it. We lean to what we like to do and what we prefer to do. So how do we deal with the very polarized, highly conflict embedded and highly traumatized spaces that honors people's humanity and honors where they are and sits with the difficult and maybe know they're never going to trust us because of everything they've gone through. So then we don't have the foundation of trust. So how do we convene? All right. And Rosa said a really good dealing with local issues has helped. And I've had that experience as well. And I still worry about, and when we have to bring the collective and the collective is fragmented like that, what do we do? Rosa. How do we then apply our skills and still do the work?
Let's bring Rosa in, and in a few moments, I'll introduce Steve Katie. Rosa. Oops. the devil's mute.
Sorry,
There
the
we
thought
go.
that comes for me, Yabome, is that it's very hard to do this work on our own. Over at the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, we've just started, well, there's a practitioners mobilization for democracy, and that's just started. And as part of that, some of us have started a community of practice for people who have facilitation and mediation skills that are wanting to bring them more into the civic realm. Because I think that if we can support one another in doing this work, that's one of the few things that might make it a little more doable. So
I would just pick up on that I had the good fortune of attending the Organization Development Network meeting at Case Western Reserve a few weeks ago. And I saw an awful lot of young folks there. And when they asked who's first time here, it seemed to me over 50% of the room raised their hands. You remember Yabome? So that was a good sign. But then my thought, having been around the track many, many times in my career, is, oh my God, do they have any idea what they're getting themselves into? And are we, going back to David Bright's work, are we in the universities and other training resources, are we even beginning to be in tune with this work as it's going to be going forward, where some of our wonderful principles may get stuffed into, in our butt and sent us out the door. So just to make it a little more dramatic than it really is. But my point is, all of us, no matter whether we're the first in this field or we're trying to stay in it and do this work, are going to be facing the space that Bob Stilger showed us, which is in there. But I'm hopeful because they were hopeful at this conference. And I'm hopeful regarding the kind of dialogue I've heard today. I'm very hopeful. It's my responsibility and honor now to introduce the host for this think tank series, Bowling Green State University, Steve Cady, to take us out, Steve. Tell us a bit about your inspiration and what to look forward to, and even make a nice pitch for being a sponsor.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. All my friends, big hug. It's just really good to see you all. Bob, it's been a while since I've had a chance to connect like this with you. So, and there's David. Hey, David, from the Academy of Management. So we have a nice partnership with the Academy, and we're looking at different ways to advance the field. And I think that the very challenges that I kind of stumbled in on here are actually the opportunities that lie before us if we really look underneath them. Resistance is information, so to speak, right? And I do think I'm hopeful. And when I particularly look at people that are here with the kind of work that everybody's doing, and the Academy of Management OD&C division is really committed to elevating the field. And so I'm really appreciative of David's leadership around that and that work of getting the OD&C division to do that work. And at BGSU, with our Doctorate in Organization Development and Change program, we have people here from other doctoral programs and so forth that are doing really important work. And I think we're a community of doctoral programs. And at BGSU, we're going in our 6th year. We are oversubscribed. We have more people than we know what to do with in some cases. And the common theme, and these are people who are working in the top 50 Fortune 50 companies, government, and nonprofits. And their common comment is that we need this now more than ever from a very business practical point of view.
Yes, it is.
So I really think that. And we have some great students in our program that just from all over the world. So I'm really encouraged by that. But I do think we need to grab it as a field. We need to grab it, make a stake, put a stake in the ground, and start owning this and stop being nice about it, so to speak. I think we need to be more bold and more aggressive and assertive, like taking care of something that we really love and we want to make sure that it gets to do all the things it's meant to do. And I think we can do that. So I'm very hopeful. I'm really optimistic, and particularly with the Think Tank series and the amazing people that are here. So thanks for bringing my voice in, Dave. I'm just really grateful for today and for all of you being here.
Who's coming up next week, Steve?
I don't know. We have people all the way through February. So it's been a flurry, amazing experience, but we have so many cool people. So Lisa, our
make sure the
guide,
schedule.
our producer and guide can share that information with everyone.
We'll make sure that in the follow-up as well, we'll all get a recording of this session. And if anything, it's just going to be more and more wonderfully frustrating from Francis's point of view, because as soon as we think we've heard one person and our brain is working on it, there's two more to follow and all the way through. But it's a great format because our main goal from my standpoint, always going forward, is to fight against any shred of complacency that we have as persons and professionals in any field. It's not a good time to be complacent. So thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, wonderful panel of sharers. And I hope to be there next week, as hopefully many of you will. So take care. Wiggle, wiggle. Bob, wonderful. Rosa, thank you. Yabome.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Wow.
Bye, Bob. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I get to catch up. I know I'll just have to get on your calendar. Go grab your email. I started doing that email calendar thing. It's a blessing and a curse, I think.
Yeah.
Very true.
You know, because you get
All
people
right.
picking it, and then they sometimes show up, sometimes don't, and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah.
Oof.
Thank you all.
Hi,
Thank
Rosa.
you all.
So how'd it
Wonderful.
go? How did today go?